This morning, I released our budget proposal based on what we heard from Albertans. It's a hopeful document based on their key priorities and what they really want. But today's budget doesn't measure up. It's not what Albertans want. It's not about ethical, competent government. It's not about fiscal responsibility. And it's certainly not about prosperity, where everyone can thrive. Instead, we have no measures to create jobs. In fact, they expect more Albertans to be unemployed and thrown onto income support. We expect high inflation, high cost of living, high auto insurance, high utility rates, high tuition. And no matter what they say on taxes, here's the reality. They introduced 39 fee and tax increases that will cost you hundreds of millions this year. If you own a house, you will now pay hundreds of dollars more in property taxes. You can thank Daniel Smith for that. If you go to university, you'll pay more in tuition. If you used to get subsidy for your childcare, you don't anymore. And if you drive a car, Daniel Smith guarantees your insurance rates are going up. So there were 5 things that Albertans were looking for: jobs, affordability, healthcare, education, public safety. There were 3 things in this budget: cuts, chaos, and corruption. So let's talk about healthcare. Well, all of these new fees are going to increase your cost of living. Daniel Smith does nothing for healthcare. When we factor in population growth and inflation growth, there is no increase for healthcare in this budget. In fact, they are chasing doctors out of the province. They're cutting primary care and prescription medicines, and they're even gutting Indigenous health programs by 28%. But what are they not cutting? What do we get out of healthcare? Well, the same companies that are in the middle of the corrupt care scandal, they're getting more. The UCP and Daniel Smith are doubling down. This budget commits more to the corrupt care, bloated contracts, chartered surgical facilities. While you wait in pain for surgery, Daniel Smith's friends will make even more from corrupt care. Albertans deserve a world-class education, but that's not what they're getting from this budget. The UCP will not build the schools that our community needs. The best case scenario is that you'll have to wait 7 years before you see a new classroom for your kids. If your child today is 12 years old, they will be in university before you see a new school in your community. And teachers and EAs in those classrooms, there's no new funding for them. And post-secondary is no better. After this government gutted post-secondary funding, this budget does nothing to restore those cuts. In fact, tuition will go up. If you're a student, you're going to pay more. Now I want to talk about making our communities safer. Everyone deserves a safe place to call home. Safe streets and safe places where they can go out with their friends and family. But this budget makes cuts to legal aid supports to help people navigate the justice system. This budget cuts programs meant to prevent family violence and abuse. These kinds of cuts don't make Alberta safer. In fact, they do the opposite. We listened to so many Albertans in the last couple of months, and their hopes for a better, more ethical, competent government. They wanted family doctors, teachers, educational assistants in the classroom, good paying jobs, diversification of our markets, an affordable place to live. Albertans, it's time for a new path forward.
Well, thanks very much. You just heard from Court Ellingson, your Alberta New Democrat Shadow Minister of Finance. I'm Naheed Nenshi, leader of Alberta's New Democrats, and I have with me today my Deputy Leader, Raki Pancholi, the Government House Leader and Official Leader of the Opposition, Christina Gray, and Marlon Schmidt, who is our lead on public accounts. So we've been spending the day today looking at this budget. And, you know, the minister in his speech today said this is not unprecedented. These are, in fact, unprecedented times. And we're seeing an unprecedented level of fiscal irresponsibility. In these difficult times for Albertans, when we face unprecedented threats, we need now more than ever an ethical and competent government to help us guide through these rocky waters. But today's budget gives us no plan at all for how to manage this. We've always known this about this government. We know that they make things up as they go along. We know they don't plan for the future. We know that they've been writing this budget on the back of a napkin over the last few weeks. But I was shocked to see how little there really is here. There's nothing in here to help Albertans. Under this budget, under Premier Smith's UCP budget, you're more likely to lose your job. You won't have a family doctor. Your kids' class sizes will get even bigger. You won't feel safe on the streets, and your cost of living will remain out of control. And you and your children and their children will be stuck paying for a generationally large deficit. Albertans have been very clear. They've told us over and over and over again that they have 5 priorities. They are jobs in the economy, the cost of living, public health care, public education, and public safety. They've also told us over and over and over again that they expect a government to be good with money and to balance its books and to be fiscally responsible. This new budget fails on every single one of these. Let's talk about tariffs, because the budget doesn't. There is no plan whatsoever in here to deal with the very real threat of tariffs, not just on energy, but on agricultural products and everything else that we produce here in Alberta. The budget actually assumes, I've never heard this number before, the tariffs will be 15%, not 25%. That's certainly not what President Trump has been promising, and even if that's a partial year adjustment, the tariffs could come in as early as Monday, which means that we don't have that kind of time to wait. Give you one example, the beef industry. There's not a word in here about how we protect our livestock and our beef industry here in Alberta. Indeed, we've thrown the beef industry to the wolves. There's nothing in here about retraining for people who find themselves unemployed, or about restoring the massive cuts that the UCP has made to post-secondary education. They're predicting in future years of this budget they're predicting in year 1 a massive increase in unemployment. I've never seen a government budget predicting that big a change in unemployment. But they somehow say, magically, this will get better in future years. But there's nothing in this budget to make it any better. They're not investing in bringing new industries to Alberta. They're not focused on anything beyond their tired old Make Alberta Great Again economic policies that haven't worked for years. Second, let's give them some credit. We finally have the UCP government's first ever measure to attack the cost of living and increase affordability. Yes, friends, they are going to give you a maximum $2 a day tax cut. That's after record increases on auto insurance, still the highest in the country. After utility rates that have much as quadrupled under this government, under housing costs that are out of control, and the highest inflation in the country. This budget actually predicts that Alberta's inflation rate will still be the highest in the country, but at least you'll have an extra $2 a day to deal with it. What they didn't mention is that this is a massive tax increase budget. There are so many taxes and fee increases in this budget. Your education property tax is slated to go up by 14%. So if you were mad at your city council for a 5 or a 7% property tax increase this year, welcome to a provincial property tax increase that is double or triple that. There are also, as you heard, 39 different fees and tax increases in this budget. So what does that mean to an average Albertan? Let's take Mike. Mike lives in Calgary. He's 45 years old. He drives a 4-year-old F-150. He lives in a typical 20-year-old Calgary home. Michael does well. He's going to save the maximum $2 a day. However, he pays the highest rates in Canada for his auto insurance. Those went up 7.5% this year. His utility rates are a little better than they were 2 years ago, but they have quadrupled under the UCP since the UCP took power. His monthly mortgage payment has increased, and because he earns more than $60,000, while he will get the maximum $2 a day cut, he also will pay more because of de-indexation of tax brackets. You remember de-indexation of tax brackets. I think that noted progressive Jason Kenney called that a pernicious tax grab. I didn't hear the minister mention about the increase on taxes because he refuses to keep tax brackets on pace with inflation. Mike will also be paying more in fuel taxes, electrical vehicle charges if he's got one, sin taxes, and no less than 38 new or increased fees to the Alberta government. Somehow that $2 a day is looking a little less useful. But you know what? We need to be concerned about Mike, but I'm more concerned about Jennifer. Jennifer's an education support worker. She really wants to go back to work. She's been on strike for weeks. And if this government ever settles with her union, she'll go back to work and she'll earn somewhere around $30,000 a year, hopefully more if they settle well. Her share of this tax cut, a few cents a day. Meanwhile, she's facing all the same increased costs as Mike, plus more. Jennifer has 2 children who need childcare, so she can go to work every day to support them. Because she's low income, she had a subsidy and she was paying close to zero for the childcare. Under the UCP's new plan, no more subsidy. Her cost will go from $0 a month to $600 a month. But she's getting a couple cents back in tax cuts. By the way, when the UCP was asked about that, they just said, why doesn't Jennifer just work another hour or 2 every day at minimum wage and she'll be fine? It's not an answer. When it comes to the other priorities that Albertans have asked for, they've asked for us to invest in, this no-plan budget fails yet again. Healthcare has not been increased. With the increase in population, healthcare is actually effectively cut as our population grows. There's no plan to reduce emergency room waiting times. There's no plan to attract more family doctors. There's no plan to fix the problems in the system beyond creating even more bureaucracy, yet more management, and even more corrupt care. And $80 million of your taxpayer money will go to those private surgical facilities with their secret bloated contracts, while there's no plan to increase the capacity of hospitals like the Royal Alex to start doing hip and knee surgeries again. On education, do you remember last September? The Premier made this huge announcement that we would be building more schools than anyone in Alberta history. Even I called it a generational investment. Well, guess how many of those schools are actually going to be built in the next 3 years under this budget? Even I was shocked to learn that the answer is 0. Not one of those promised schools will break ground in the next 3 years. If you've got a kid in school right now, that new school will not even begin construction in the next 3 years. Now, they're going to talk about these schools. They're going to think about them. They're going to waste money designing a different school for every site. They're going to put up signs saying future site of a school. They just won't actually build any. And our education funding remains the lowest per student in the country. We got a good tidbit in the budget today. This government long ago stopped reporting on class sizes because they don't want you to know how much class sizes are increasing. But in this budget, we learned that this school year, we hired 1 teacher for every 48 students. That's not good enough. What about public safety? Well, there's nothing new here at all. This government continues to defund municipal police services. They are police defunders, while trying to exert more power and control over them. There's no money here for no police officers. There's nothing here beyond whatever Danielle Smith promised Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, for all the good that did. What there is $355 million for their friends to finally build these recovery centers they keep promising, another $9 million on a new war room, the mental health war room whose only purpose is to fight critics of the government online. And despite not investing anything in Albertans' real priorities, this budget continues to waste money in extraordinary ways. From bloated surgical contracts to questionable procurement throughout the government, there's nothing here to restore Albertans' faith in this government. They just keep picking fights. They just keep wasting money. They keep focusing on their own corruption and their own friends. And let me tell you, I'm a guy who tabled 11 balanced budgets in a row. We cut the City of Calgary's debt while I was mayor by $500 million. I am absolutely shocked at a $10 billion turnaround in our fiscal position in 1 year. from over a $5 billion surplus to over a $5 billion deficit. I've never seen anything like this before. And if you dig into the footnotes of the budget, you will see this is not about Donald Trump or tariffs. This is about the inability of this government to manage its own fiscal house. Even if there were no tariffs, even if somehow we skated free of the tariffs, we would still have a $3 billion deficit this year. I have never seen a government waste money like this. I have never seen a government that is this bad with money, and I've seen a lot of bad governments. Now, there is a lot of money in this budget for talking about stuff, and they love to talk about stuff, but not actually do the stuff. So, if you're waiting for a blue line connection to the Calgary airport, not going to happen in the next 3 years. If you're waiting for the long-promised cardiac service in Lethbridge, that's not in this budget. If you're waiting for the Bow River Reservoir to save southern Alberta from catastrophic drought and flooding, well, maybe shovels might get in the ground under an NDP government nearly 20 years after the floods. And if you're waiting for a hospital in South Edmonton, keep on waiting. At a time when we need ethical, competent government more than ever, this government has simply delivered us no plan. All they've given us is more cuts, more chaos, and more corruption. So, with that, we'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you. Starting questions, if you can please state your name and your outlet. If you are on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. We have time for one question and one follow-up.
Hey, Matthew Black with the Journal. I just want to ask about the tax cut. Do you think it's worth the deficit we're getting, or could that money have been better used elsewhere?
You know, Albertans need affordability. Albertans need something to help them deal with the cost of living. This, however, is nothing but performance art. It comes out to $2 a day at the absolute maximum. It's $2 a day if you earn more than $60,000 a year and you have no tax credits. And that's not going to make a difference at a time when they refuse to take action on things like auto insurance, utility rates, and the cost of housing. And it costs us a lot of money. And remember, deficits are nothing but deferred taxation. They got to get paid back. So if you don't pay for it this year, your children and your grandchildren are going to pay for it with interest. And that's all we've got today. It's a shuffling of the deck chairs at best.
I want to ask about Edmonton as well. Looks like we got around about $100 million, and given Calgary got 3 times as much, do you think that's enough to do what Edmonton needs in its downtown?
Well, you know, the challenge is that the legislative fiscal framework is so very low compared to the real needs. So the cities of Edmonton and Calgary, even under this budget, are receiving less, not in inflation-adjusted dollars, in actual dollars. They're receiving less than they did in 2012 or 2011. It's just not enough when you think about the fact that I wish I knew the Edmonton number, and one of my colleagues is going to yell it out, I'm sure, but the city of Calgary increased by 100,000 people last year. The city of Calgary increased by more than the size of the city of Red Deer, without a single new hospital, with almost no new schools, with no new investment in transit or in helping the city get better. And at some point, the province has to realize they can't keep shuffling the money around forever. At some point, you have to invest in quality of life for folks. Did any of my Edmonton colleagues want to jump in on Edmonton specifically? 70,000, I'm not sure. 70,000 apparently in Edmonton. But did you want to say anything else, either of you? Okay. We'll go to the next question.
Charles Lal, Radio-Canada, Alberta. Could I just get your reaction to the budget in French?
Oui. C'est un budget aujourd'hui qui ne fait pas ce que les Albertains veulent. Vraiment, c'est un budget qui n'a pas à avoir un plan et qui ne fait des investissements sur les priorités des Albertains. Et aussi, c'est un budget qui dépense d'argent, mais pas sur les priorités des Albertains.
My follow-up, you can answer this one in French and in English. When the NDP was in power for 4 years, it was 4 deficits. What would you do differently?
So here's the thing. When Rachel Notley was the premier, she was handed a horrific fiscal situation. And she still managed to keep our debt to GDP ratio under control while investing in the things that Albertans wanted. Today, this budget, even if there are no tariffs, still has a systemic deficit in it. We rely on oil and gas revenues more than we ever had historically. After generations of premiers trying to cut our reliance on oil and gas royalties, this budget is even more sensitive to that. And so the real challenge here is, you know, people say all the time to me, look, I know the NDP is going to be way better on education. I know the NDP is going to be way better on healthcare. I know the NDP is going to be way better on all the things that matter to my family, but at least the Conservatives are good with money. And what we've learned in this budget is they are generationally bad with money. And that's the thing that shocks me. I hate debt. I hate deficit. I believe that we shouldn't put debt onto future generations. And the fact that they are so frivolous in spending money but not investing in things that Albertans really need, one teacher for 48 students, is a real big problem for me. Donc si on peut penser de l'école historique des gouvernements, on peut voir que les populistes progressifs sur le pays ont beaucoup d'options sur les budgets. We're better with money. Si on parle de Gary Doer à Manitoba, André Romano de Saskatchewan, et oui, aussi à Rachel Notley, on peut voir que le Parti Nouveau démocratique peut faire un budget pour tout. Hi.
James with the Western Standard. Thanks for
Are we
taking my
going to kick
question.
you out? Still too soon? No. Go ahead.
Thanks. Speaking about oil and gas, Alberta is a very wealthy jurisdiction. We all know it. And here we are having a conversation about running deficits. So what are your ideas to generate more revenue from oil and gas? And what are your ideas to generate revenue outside of oil and gas?
Great question. So, you know, one of the things we have is a royalty structure that I had a tiny little part in giving some advice on how we set it up. And a lot of our oil sands projects are now hitting the payout period, which actually, believe it or not, means a terrible analogy, a gusher of money for the provincial government. And yet, they're not able to take this generational wealth that won't be there forever and figure it out to invest it. So I'll give you an example. The Premier has this great plan to increase the Heritage Trust Fund to $250 billion. I don't particularly oppose this plan. But if you look at this budget, they're putting $1 billion in this year and $0 in for the next 2 years. They're burning the furniture to heat the house, spending the money that should be saved. And so ultimately, the Premier can talk all she wants about we must double Alberta oil and gas production, but this budget actually forecasts a decline in conventional crude oil production in Alberta. And so it's not enough to go around screaming about tariffs or yelling about the need to build new pipelines, which we need, but we actually have to ensure that we're working hard to develop global export markets. We're working hard to shrink the differential between WCS and WTI, which this budget is conservatively assuming will massively increase. We have to make sure that the Trans Mountain expansion is actually operating at full capacity to export markets, not sending its oil to California as it currently is, so that we can shrink that differential and make sure that the government can actually make some money. As for the rest of it, we need an economic development plan. And so what we see in this budget is nothing about creating new industries, attracting foreign investment. There's a little bit in there about Kevin O'Leary data centers that might employ 100 or 200 Albertans after billions of dollars of investment. They're assuming there'll be less media and film going on in Alberta despite the weak Canadian dollar. I saw nothing in there about agri-tech, about life sciences, about financial services and fintech, about the next generation of agri-food and agribusiness. These are the things we have to focus on to build our economy.
So a lot of people have moved to Alberta in the last few years. Some people would say that's a financial hindrance. Others would say that it's a long-term benefit. So what are your thoughts on population growth?
Well, we certainly have had a challenge. You know, when you're adding 100,000 people to Calgary and you have a government that is just not ready, willing, or able to deal with that population growth, it's a huge problem. That's why 1 million Albertans don't have access to a family doctor right now. More are leaving than are coming. And even if you attract some, you're not attracting enough. Now, under the new federal government's plans, we see a significant decline in population growth in Alberta. And that is a very, very double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, it does mean that we might be able to catch our breath on some of the facilities that we need if we were actually building them in this budget, which we're not. On the other hand, if I can sound like an economist a bit too much, economic growth has been completely demand-driven in Alberta. It has not been driven by real increases in the real economy. It's been increased by the fact that there's more people out there buying bananas and eggs. And if we lose that demand-focused improvement in the economy and we have nothing to replace it with in terms of job creation, we've got a very big problem.
Last round for questions. Thank you, everyone. That
Okay, thanks,
concludes-
everyone.